Alternative energy sector in India. The need for a sustainable lifestyle, coupled with forward-looking technologies, present a diverse business opportunity in the renewable sources of energy. India is pioneering in fiscal and infrastructural reforms to be an independent and self-reliant source of energy by creating massive opportunities for India Incorporated. Our moderator for this panel is Mr. Govindraj Ethiraj, founder of IndiaSpend and BOOMLive. Mr. Ethiraj is a television and print journalist who has reported and written on Indian business for over 25 years. He is a media executive and entrepreneur whose public interest journalism ventures are safeguarding the transparency and accuracy as well as the integrity of news in specific as well as internet in general. He was named in 2018 as the 𝗵𝗆 Prize Laureate in recognition for his leadership with Boom, IndiaSpend and Fact Checker. Joining us today, our eminent panelists are Mr. Ashish Khanna, who is the President of Renewables in Tata Power. Mr. Khanna has more than 3 decades of rich experience in the area of renewables, utility, infrastructure project management. He provides inputs to the government and regulatory bodies which help formulate progressive policies for renewables industries. He is admired for his strategic thinking and commitment for execution of excellence. Mr. Khanna is now vested with the responsibility of growing the renewables business with Tata Power Group. Joining us today, we also have with us Mr. Harsh Shah, CEO of IndiGrid. Mr. Shah has extensive experience in infrastructure sector across bidding, financing, operating, mergers and acquisitions, and regulatory policies. Mr. Shah was instrumental in setting up IndiGrid, India's first infrastructure investment trust in the power and transmission sector. He is also a member of the SEBI Advisory Committee for InvITs and REITs and the Financial Markets Committee of CII. Over to you now, Mr. Ethiraj.
Hello and welcome to this discussion on alternate sources of energy. But even as we talk about alternate sources of energy, let's pick up on an interesting news development. So some 17 of 135 coal thermal plants in the country, in India, at the beginning of October have only 0 days of coal left. Some 107 power plants are at critical stage, which means that they have less than 8 days of coal. Now, why there is a coal shortage is linked to many other reasons, including the fact that prices of coal internationally have been going up, and there is obviously a very, very strong post-pandemic demand, plus other factors which have affected production in eastern India. So there are many factors at play, including at some level climate change, so which also tells you about how complex the world of energy generation is becoming or has become already. This is also obviously a good time to talk about what is the role of renewables and what is the role of alternate in a country like India. Remember that India is now almost generating about 100,000 megawatt plus of renewable energy, and that makes it roughly 11% of total capacity. Now that percentage, unless I'm corrected by my panelists who are going to speak shortly, is ahead of even China and is comparatively placed against many other countries in the world. So on this scale, India is doing quite well. Now, and also remember that it used to be about 6.7% in 2016-17, and like I said, close to about 11% now, share of renewable to total power. In some states like Karnataka, the figures I have suggest that we are at almost 43% renewable energy. States like Tamil Nadu, AP, Andhra Pradesh and Rajasthan about 20%. And also equally, on the other hand, there are states in northern India, large states like UP, Delhi, Haryana, where it's either 4% or 1%, so very low. So even within India, there is a big disparity in the way alternate energy is being generated and obviously being consumed. So on the other hand, even as we want to invest in alternate energy and given our head start, alternate energy has its own challenges. Wind power is one example where we've done a lot of investment, but we are now faced with the challenge of repowering wind turbines, as in bringing them, refurbishing and repowering and making them more contemporary in terms of their capacity and efficiency. So those are some of the newer challenges that we face, but the larger challenge and opportunity obviously continues to be what we can do in the energy space, in renewable energy. And finally, to wrap it all up, you cannot have a discussion without talking about money. How do you finance some of these projects, including how do you keep the finances of the distribution companies who buy power healthy, and or you keep them supported? There are a lot of numbers. All of them are very frightening when it comes to distribution and distribution companies in India. So we will not get into that, and let's focus on purely the generation side for today. So my guests are right now are Harsh Shah of IndiGrid, transmission and distribution company, and also generating alternate energy, Ashish Khanna of Tata Power. So thank you all for joining me, and let me hand it over to Ashish to go off first to speak for about 5 or 6 minutes on how you see the space developing from your own vantage point at Tata Power, and particularly the way Tata Power has responded and adjusted to the new opportunities in renewables and solar specifically in your case. Ashish, it's over to you.
Thanks, Govind. And if you allow me, before going further on it, I think very soon, while we are speaking of the alternate source of energy, we might have to use some other English for this, or it will be co-aligned source of energy and something like that. I don't think so. In the last few years, renewable has, even though termed earlier as an alternate source of energy, remains an alternate source of energy. I think most of us are looking as a main source of energy, maybe in a decade and two. And all of this has happened because of very, very dramatic changes in the technology and the adoption of renewables. I won't say that climate change was such an issue in early part of the last decade, and I'm talking about 2010-11. But if you see the way the technology has changed, especially in renewables, whether we look at the wind turbines or we look at the solar panels or the technology thereof, and the way the efficiency level has increased, and the way we are making more and more bigger and bigger machines producing much bigger volumes of in terms of energy than we have in the past. That has been a big change, and that change has resulted into lower costs. And this lower costs, when you look at it combined with the advantage of a climate change, is I think the shift and the inflection point which we all were looking, which started from last 3-4 years. India has done a tremendous job. I have been in the industry for long and in various infrastructure segments too. I've never come across an infrastructure industry which has leapfrogged to this level. 2014-15, where we were hardly 4 gigawatt in terms of solar. We are 7 times to 8 times that similar number of years. Wind was there at around 28 gigawatt, but now we are even looking for repowering that. So I think India has taken advantage, even though we were late entrant in this, of this whole technology and the cost reductions which is possible. Let's look at it from a standpoint. You mentioned about the coal. I think I always keep on saying that this is not one versus others. There's not this alternate to that. I think for quite some time, we need to co-align both of them, take the advantages of both. Climate change is something in our life, and especially in the next generation, they are going to be very difficult times. The way the whole thing has been coming out, whether we look at the recent floods in Canada or heat waves all across Europe, we have been finding that the climate change is coming and impacting us much quicker than what we were anticipating. I'm very sure that in this COP26 in November of this year, we are going to have some commitment from all the nations, a commitment which will also fructify into certain results rather than just the papers, which will help us to curtail to a large extent. But if you look at the way the climate change is happening and the global warming which is taking place, I think 2050, which we were looking as one milestone by which time which we will able to capture a lot of this carbon, will be a very difficult time for most of us. So I think if you look at both, then here we have a source of energy which is renewable, is helping the environment. And on the other side, we have a source of energy which is much more cost effective. You mentioned about the DISCOM finances for that matter, but if you look around the current tariffs which are coming from this renewable power, It is much, much lower than most of the variable cost in any thermal power plants. So I think that remain a standpoint where we should look and take it very seriously, that if we manage the discoms well, then we have a source of energy which is going to help us. But again, I will come to the standpoint that it is still not reached the level where it is 24/7. We still need some thermal, we still need a lot of hydros, we still need a lot of storage, and we need to invest in those technologies. If I take a look back on where Tata Power has been and how we have been investing and our commitment of being carbon neutral by 2040, I think it's a reality of life. We are also looking for a growth of multiple X in the next 5 years on our renewable segment. But I think more importantly is, as an industry and as a company, the contribution towards making it affordable to all. And that affordability cannot come only from a utility scale, which is actually garnering the maximum optics currently. The tariffs are 2.14, 1.99 or 2.01. All of that is garnering the maximum optics. I think important factor for all of us is to invest in technologies and resources which are best suited for a country. You mentioned that today we have around 11% of the adoption here, which is much better than most of the countries. But if you look at the total power consumption in this country, we are 1/3 of the world average at this stage. Nowhere close to what we are talking about China and US and Europe for that matter. So if we have to increase this power adoption, and electricity will be a major source of energy in the next 3 decades, from where it is to where it will be in the next 3 decades, it's going to be a major source of energy. India is very well poised. In my view, renewable energy is very well poised to help and support these initiatives where we have these entrepreneurs. And from our standpoint, rather just not being complacent on making utility scale projects, I think the business of rooftops, the business of solarized pumps, which are also very critical for this country. One of the reasons for distribution companies not doing well is because of the free agriculture power which has been given to the farmers. And there has been an alternative which is very well established now under the KUSUM scheme of having a solarized pumps. I think there also Tata Power stands great business opportunities, and we are doing very well. But I think for a country also it is required. Rooftop, again, I believe is something which we should be supporting in that cause of utilizing the technology which is best fit. And once the storage will come at a much cheaper options or most cost-effective options, I think we are looking for a solution where most of these pollutants or the energy which produces pollutants may not be required, or required at a stage only to stabilize the grid and not otherwise. That's my little say on it as we speak.
Okay, thank you for that. So just another piece of background which I thought I'll bring in. It's only in the last few months we've seen massive announcements in the renewable space. Both the Ambanis as well as the Adanis, the Reliance and the Adani group have announced. Adani has committed about $20 billion in the renewable space, and the Ambanis have committed $10 billion. So obviously all of this can act as a big trigger to the opportunities that we're talking about. These things obviously don't fructify as these are all over 10 years and more. So, but the intent of big business to go in, and I'm sure the Tatas as well, is a good sign in the right direction. Okay, Harsh, I'm coming to you. Harsh, so you run a power infrastructure investment trust. So that's a slightly different approach, so that people don't get confused and think that you are an actual power generator like Ashish here. So tell us about how the trust works, and also tell us about the portfolio that you operate of transmission and renewable energy systems.
No, thanks a lot, Govind. So yeah, we are a transmission utility and we manage transmission assets. Most of them being extra high voltage transmission lines, which acts as energy highways. And we play a critical role to integrate the country's grid. We are part of the national grid, which works towards integrating the overall in power sector. And we've got 5 regions in the country, and how do you integrate them and operate them at one frequency is with the help of a national grid, which allows balancing of power and then demand as and when required. So we are part of that network. And we are a very small crucial link of the overall sector. If we calculate the power sector, it will probably be less than 1% in terms of size. Interstate transmission would be probably 3%. So that's a very small segment of the overall sector, but then that acts as a backbone. It's like highways, right? So you may have more district roads and MDRs and local roads, but the national highways are limited, but they are the ones that transport goods over a faster time frame and longer distance. So pretty much similar to that, we are electricity highways, and that's what we operate in. We started investing into utility scale power projects just about a year ago, and many objectives on that. One was that it had pretty similar contract structure which suited our business model, as well as we see the growth, as Ashish mentioned and you mentioned, in the sector is going to be tremendous, and we want to play our role out there. So I think that are the 2 points on the questions that you answered. I would just add one more question on where Ashish ended. More than generation, I think next 2 decades, we see majority expansion coming from consumption. Right? And one of the things which Ashish touched upon is expansion of energy sector. And I see a large part of expansion coming beyond the normal growth. It is going to be from electrification of devices, right? For example, EV that we speak a lot about, hear a lot about, right? Whether it's a scooter or a car, is one of the large consumer of oil and gas. It's one of the large energy consumption in the country, and especially for a country like ours, which is importing, it's kind of also a burden on fiscal deficit. We are at a juncture as a country where you are dependent on import on one type of fuel, which is oil and gas, which is not only imported, you are also into geopolitical tensions because of that. On the other side of fuel, on variable cost, you have virtually free source of energy from solar or wind or hydro. And if you are able to reduce your dependence on oil and gas and increase your reliance on the renewable energy, imagine the amount of growth, independence, international importance that the country can generate. So I think that's one link which I think India cannot afford to miss out on this growth because of that, because we are largely dependent on import for energy. And we see electricity eating into oil and gas sector put together. And that's a big chunk of a massive expansion that can happen. Certainly, these are very, very early days. The EVs are not affordable right now for mass market. They're still dependent on subsidies, still expensive. But it's about a decade from now, you can really shift. A decade ago, solar was 15 rupees and where it is today. So can EV travel that journey is going to be a big question in terms of expanding demand for the country. And I think that could be a material phase shift for the country.
Right. So, you're obviously carrying a lot of thermal power right now in your own networks, and you have over 140 operating projects from what I can see. Now, tell us about how you see the challenges of sourcing and transporting thermal power versus renewable power, which would be obvious and apparent to someone within the industry, but may not be so much to someone outside.
That this is unique about electricity, and then first I'll talk about we cannot differentiate between the power that we transfer. It's like saying we will only allow EV on a highway and not allow a diesel truck. You can't really differentiate that, and it's not in control of transmission utility as well. By nature, we are supposed to be neutral. We cannot choose because it's like a national infrastructure. But to your question, I think electrons are electrons, whether they are generated from coal or renewable. And to that, what Ashish mentioned is we believe this will coexist. I think one thing is to say coal is bad, but then it's just, I would say, a little bit of negative euphoria playing out over there. It provides fundamental based load. Renewables are variable energy. The storage costs are still expensive. Coal plant, you can start with a push button and it'll start generating electricity. It's not the same for renewable. So they will
Yeah,
still
so
provide.
that's my Harsh. Actually, that's my question, really. I mean, so how does when you, yeah, all power is power, and that comes to you. But how do you see in terms of flow and consistency, and to what extent can we learn from your the way energy flows to you, and about this consistency of generation, and to what extent can we, or are we depending on solar, and at what times of the day, for example?
To that, I think, see, one is, I would say, Indian grid electrical system are extremely robust. Right? We have not seen material variability because it gets taken care at in a millisecond manner at the source of demand and generation. It's a very, very smooth operation. However, to your point, solar operates during day. Right? That's a very, you start at morning 7 o'clock and 4 o'clock, you'll have a peak generation coming around 12 to 2 and it starts tapering down. And that's visible in the grids, that's visible in the control centers, that this is where the power is coming from. So that's to answer that daily variability exists because when the sun comes out, the solar will start. And storage is minuscule or nil in the country right now, so there's no real example of that. On the other hand, the coal can be, when you want. So therefore, the base load, which is the largest amount of demand that reliably needs to be served, is served by coal today, and we believe it will be continue to served by coal for a considerable period of time because these are investments done, their plants ready. Many of them are less polluting, like supercritical plants. Right? So they should continue and provide the base load. So they will continue. The peak load of any country is typically evening time. So post 6 to 9. When people come back from office, that's the peak load. And at that time, there is no solar. So you've got to depend on something other than solar at that time. And right now, it is going to be coal, which is the base load or a peak load serving generation capacity in the country.
Got it. Ashish, give us a sense on where we are today in coal and thermal, more from an installed capacity. As I understand, we are now at almost 15 to 20% over what we actually generate in terms of capacity because we've created it, and we've also got a lot of projects on paper, which I'm assuming may either get deferred or delayed. So where does that stand? I mean, and how is that going to potentially impact the way we invest ahead, given the opportunities in renewables?
See, so let's understand one thing. You raised the point, and if I can pitch it on the earlier point, recently, if you look at what is the IEX tariffs, very recently you mentioned about shortages which are still not affected. But if you look at it, we are looking at an RTC tariff of greater than 11 rupees, a peak of 15, night 12, day 4. We need energy, right? At the end of the day, it's a demand and a supply. A country which is blessed with 748 gigawatt, if I remember the number right, of solar energy potential, 340 gigawatts of wind, more than 300 gigawatt of solar capacity is installed. I would say nameplate capacity is installed. We should not have been looking at these tariffs, right? The cost of imported coal has risen. But if you look at it, the cost of domestic coal or captive coal remains as it is, other than the operating cost, which has gone up because of the dependencies on the fuel as a gasoline and other factors out there. So there is a demand there, right? And I won't say that we are over capacities. The challenge is, if you ask me, there are certain units which require either to be upgraded to come at a certain level or required to be cannibalized. Now that's a decision which we have to take. The same will happen with renewables too. We are today fresh at the peak of the youth where your renewable is. 5 to 6 years, the power is coming, all is well. But in another 5 to 10 or 20 years, you will realize, oops, if I calculated that if you have this 100 gigawatt of solar, which was supposed to come by 2022, you would have virtually covered Switzerland with only solar panels. And we will cover that, right? That area is going to help us. So in another decade and a half, we are going to have a huge amount of solar installation, and some of these plants would have been outlived. even at the current level of efficiencies, the way it is going on. We'll always have these challenges unless we adopt technology and take decisions on what to do with the past. Carrying that baggage, like you mentioned in the initial stage itself, repowering for wind turbines. If I have a wind out there and I'm ready to utilize that wind and generate more power with a more advanced machine, I think we should have policy initiatives to support that cause. Today, the main challenge, which Harsh mentioned, while they don't discriminate between renewable power and thermal power or a hydropower, renewable by nature is an infirm power. It can go up and down very quickly, right? A cloud cover can take it. We run those plants more than 3 gigawatt, as we know. It's not that easy as such, because by nature it is infirm, and we need storage along with it to make it across. So we need to have these coexist, and we also need to see that this coexistence comes at the most cost-effective manner for a country which requires energy. Even as we speak, while whatever we say, this recent exchange, rates which has come across in the last few days has been an eye-opener for all of us. While on one side we have bids of solar, which is at what, 2 rupees, 50 paise, whatever you say, between 2 to 3 rupees, all the renewable power, and still you have a demand which is ready to supply. And we have done a study in our organization. We did a study on how the things map out. The peak of solar and the peak of wind actually work out very well for 70% of the power requirement of a city, even a city like Mumbai. So you don't need a huge amount of a storage or a RTC power per se. And you can always have a capacity or over capacities of the renewable power to take care that you even surface or you can manage this peak power. The challenge is the night power, where you don't have much of a requirement in this country, right? As such, we are blessed not with such a cold weather that I need a lot of heating power for electricity for heating my houses out there. So we are very well placed to actually use technology to align the solar, which is in abundance, wind, which is in abundance, and a little bit of pump hydros or a hydros which can act, and of course coal. We are blessed with coal too. We just can't disregard it just because it is not the right thing to say. That's not the right way to do for a country which needs energy, and that's our first requirement. Only challenge, like I said, that you are saying it is surplus is because we are not taking care of those plants which should have been cannibalized and utilized with a better power. Now, the other challenge which will come, if you ask me, is this hydrogen. Today we are into green and blue, but tomorrow what's going to take place is that this renewable power, which is today established as the cheapest source of energy, is going to be utilized for the other processes, whether it is the steel industry or other industries, and a part of a fuel in the next few decades. So you just can't stop it. The best way is to take full advantage of it and utilize it for all the purposes. That's where I am on this.
Right. So if I can ask you to expand on that, let's say from a Tata Power point of view, as you look ahead, and this is where I'm trying to understand, how much of, let's say, management time and vision is now focused on alternate and renewable, which is what we're really trying to understand. So what does your basket look like as you go ahead? And I'm assuming also that this basket would have changed in composition even from, let's say, maybe the way it was, you had scenario planned 10 years ago to how you're planning today. So if you could walk us through that.
Sure. Let me give you some real-time examples. So we were I think the first manufacturers of cell and module as an integrated unit in this country. From last 3 decades we are there, but even our current capacities are less than a gigawatt, both of them combined together. Not that we were not professional enough or good enough. We generally command a premium in the outside market, though currently we are all using it for our captive needs. We are the first company which has exported more than 1 gigawatt outside the country in this place, and always command a premium from the other neighborhood products, if you ask me. The challenge is we never expanded it. Anyone can say, why not, if there is such an opportunity? You need a policy framework when you are looking at manufacturing per se. It doesn't come on a transaction basis. We have taken a call as a country. The policymakers have decided that for the initial stages, the tariff matters more rather than the manufacturing in this country. So now we all are expanding. You have heard about various announcements, but yes, we are looking forward. We are also looking towards that cause where if there are enough policy framework, then we should have products from this country, because there is a guarantee of 25 years on the performance of these products, and it matters. If you look at the businesses on utility scale, I am with you. We are also now looking for the opportunities in place, and are on record saying that 5 to 6 have growth from where we are in the next 5 years on our utility scales. We also do the EPC business, and that is also going multifold. I think the important factor here I will share with you is there are two businesses which are very nascent for a very long time with us. Long time means the 5 year in this industry. We are number one rooftop player, EPC player in this country from last 5 years. But what we look across now is a multiple X growth in the next 5 years, which we have not seen only because of the opportunities. Solar pump is a business where we did last year more than anyone else. And we also look around a multiple X growth on that business segment too. Where I'm coming forward to is that an organization like us, which provides, and along with this, we also in our business provide EV charging station and other tools for energy conservation. If you look around it, you are so right that our strategy has changed now. Few years back, this 10x, 11x growth would have been just brushed aside. That words come cheap in this part of the world. Today, it's a reality. It's a reality of life that most of us will able to achieve what we are trying to do. I think the important factor which will play a very important role, and which I have seen across in some of the neighboring countries, is that this positive environment and the perception which has been created should be maintained. Our plants, which are now executing and are installing in gigawatt level in this country, should able to perform at the level where what has been emphasized originally. If that performance goes low, the grid is not behaving, the plants are not behaving, projects are not coming up, I think we will have impediments. There are many soothsayers who will say, I said so. And I think it is important that as a country and as an industry, we create the positive impact, because there is enough opportunity. We just can't afford a negative impression about it. And all we need to do is to do the right things. We need to install our plants with the right quality and adopt the technologies of future for operating those plants, so that I use less water, even for cleaning my modules. I use more and more of technology and digitization while I am operating or executing this plant. And if you ask me, India has the potential and the skill set to do it. There's no reason why we should not be doing it.
Right, and that's another important point. We're all talking about coal shortages because that's in the news, but water shortages have affected generation in recent years in India, and that's something that we should be very conscious of as well. So I'm going to come back to you in a second, Harsh. Tell us about. You got into solar later. I don't know whether you started and your intention was to acquire solar assets on the generation side, since you're primarily, as you said, a highway. Providing the highway infrastructure. So tell us about how that fits in and where's that going?
So I think we got into it later, and then I would say we are a fringe player. We own small solar power in comparison to not many platforms that are existing in the country today. So I think in terms of the way we looked at it, we had the same skill set. Managing transmission utilities, it's a little bit more complicated cross-country versus managing a solar power plant. Then the same regulator, similar kind of contract. So we saw it as a synergy for people, synergy for digitization, synergy for asset management. And that's how we decided to go in that. And then we have very, very small plants in the scheme of things right now. and my outlook today is that there are more players who wants to build and build assets than there are projects out there, which probably for a country is good in the shorter run. You will see more capacity and lesser tariffs probably. But I think what Ashish mentioned is extremely important, that we can't just look at the rupees number, because these plants need to last for 25 years, 30 years. And at least for India, there are limited or a handful number of plants who have experience of living through 10 years, 5 years as well. So we'll go through that evolution journey in next 5-7 years. And the way we are looking at it is that we'll have to wait for that to see what separates men from the boys, and how the plants are built. And then we will see some kind of disruption happening, because wherever we have procured a non-commodity item like a commodity, which is an L1 basis, we have seen troubles brewing in, when the rubber hits the road eventually. So in this case, it will be probably after 3 to 4 years, and then we will have to wait and see and monitor how that really performs.
So are you saying that your solar investment is more like an experiment to understand how this space is playing out, or no? Or is it a conscious strategy too?
No, so it is a conscious strategy. We will continue to do it, but it will remain about 25% of our portfolio. We will remain a transmission utility by size and nature, but 20-25% we may do solar. That's how we are looking at it.
And how do the other players see you, Harsh? Because unlike other industries, so like for instance in automobiles, I wouldn't think of let's say an investment trust and coming and buying an auto company to run it against other auto companies. Whereas power, you have a unique blend of players. Someone like you, who's obviously a financial company or an organization with investor funds, buying up assets and then managing them. You have Tata Power, which is, let's say, a century-old company, year-old company, which is also in the same game. So how do you see this landscape? And particularly for someone like you who's maybe come in a little later.
I think, in which is just a way to own a business, right? The business doesn't change. Business is of utility. So within the same legal framework, one can own a hotel for that matter, right? Or a school institute. But you can't compare the two, because it's fundamentally different businesses. Right? So we are a utility by nature, and therefore rather a little bit more restrictive business model. So the only difference between a company and an infrastructure trust is that we are a little more governed by SEBI regulation. We give mandatory payout ratios, and we have a leverage cap in comparison to any other company in the infrastructure or utility space. So which gives probably investors a little more comfort on certainty and stability. Right? On the other hand, for growth, we need to raise capital and acquire more assets. So that's the difference between the two. Otherwise, we are a transmission utility, and in many cases, we're much smaller than Tata Power here, but we would compare to a good part of Tata Power in terms of our business model, in terms of our operating model, etc. We would compare similar to, let's say, an Adani transmission or a power grid in a similar manner. So it is a utility, and we don't run it like a financial company. We run it like a utility.
Right, and the reason I'm asking this also is that for someone who's looking at it from outside, how could models like this really hasten the growth and expansion of the industry? Because this is a new way of, let's say, as you said, acquiring assets, maybe shifting debt around, maybe absorbing some of the earlier losses, so on.
So I think, this is in which nothing but just a better way of raising capital, where investors feel comfortable putting in larger money. And that's why if you look at national monetization pipeline, if you do control F, how many times it's used, it cross 100. So I think it's just to garner more capital, because it is safer for investors, more transparent, better governed. And that's the reason people are looking at it as a method of investment. And just to say, IndiGrid was one of the success example in national monetization pipeline deck. So that's just a way of doing business. Now, how does it support this growth? It's just that it'll garner more capital to grow, if one was to choose this way, because it's more transparent, easier to invest, and stable. However, it's an enabler. It's not a fundamental driver. The fundamental driver remains what Ashish mentioned: good projects, stable policy regime, quality control, good execution, deployment of technology. These are the main drivers of the business. The capital is just an enabler. And in the world where we are in right now, where capital is abundant, I think it will still remain available as long as the first few drivers are delivered by the companies.
Right, and therefore I'm assuming that you are attracting capital which otherwise may not have come into this space.
Okay, so I think it's a journey. So 5 years ago, yes, that capital would not have come in, and the way and the manner and size in which it is coming. So in the last 5 years, there's about 2 lakh crores that has come in as an AUM under IndiGrid put together. And alternatively, I mean, one can think about whether this capital would come or not, but then the rigor, the force, the speed with which it has come is just tremendous. Because if you look at it, one world's largest global investors have chosen this path to invest in Indian infrastructure sector in the chosen field. So somebody has bought a road platform or created a road platform. Somebody is doing only renewable, only transmission, real estate. And these are names which control $1 trillion of capital across the world. They have chosen to invest via these platforms because it's better controlled from an investor perspective. So I think that evolution would not have happened. I mean, we have been talking about garnering pension fund and insurance companies in infrastructure for, I think, 20 years, right? But over the last 5 years, this has picked up really well because of the right framework being enabled for them to invest.
Right, and in a way, you've also answered the compliance and governance questions, which is, I guess, part of this event today, which is that why would investors invest? Because they see more transparency, more compliance, and better governance, and this structure does permit that, which will hopefully accelerate the flow of capital. Ashish, can I come back to you? So, just a sort of slightly offhand question: what's your largest rooftop installation right now in India?
We did the world largest on a single site, which happens to be in India. It's more than 12 megawatt out there. We did the world largest on a cricket stadium. We did the India's largest as a carport as such. So I think there are a lot of optics which we are doing. But if you allow me, I will go back to the point which Harsh was making, and I think it's very critical. While we are attracting foreign investment, and that is what I was alluding to, that we need to do the right things for the right people to remain in the right industry. I think the important factor again is that are we the first and the most preferred port for them to anchor and invest, or there are options with them around us too, which they might or maybe taking over right now. I think those options are something which we should look forward very seriously. That is it all, or there is much more which is possible. And I think, again, we have to be very conscious of the fact that in all these investments, optics plays a very important role and perception plays a very important role. The governance is one factor on it, which they will do a due diligence. But if we are going back on our contracts, if we have all those, even at one level or a two level or one contract, it creates enough risk perception in the minds of these big investors. And they are sitting on billions and billions of dollars. But they look at it from a small window on where to go and appreciate the fact that they have options across. And if you look out that even in the Far East countries, there are major investments which are coming up in small countries like Taiwan, Vietnam. Even these countries are attracting a lot of investments. So I think we should be very conscious of the fact that we as an industry have to just do the right things and create the right environment for this investment to keep on flowing. There is, like Harsh said, a lot of money which is available around, but we also have to make them look at us and this industry as a most preferred industry as well as the country for it. I don't think so today we have reached that level.
Yeah, and would you want to use an example? I mean, are you talking about, for instance, contracts being reneged upon, or I mean, is there something that is your primary concern here, which could cause this perception problem?
It's a fact of life that when you are signing power purchase agreements, if you look at the current level where we are in, while it has become very overtly competitive, this reverse auction process is A lot of emotions comes into it. Believe me, I participate on it day in and day out. A lot of emotions comes into it. So you never know. And at the end of the day, you are bidding on certain Excel sheet calculations. It's your assumptions on commodities. Everything has been commoditized there. And then you are assuming God, Son, because we consider him God, and you are assuming everything else too. Foreign exchange, this, that, import dependence, land cost, all our assumptions on an Excel sheet, which looks perfect. But then the reality in each and every project is very different. Now, taking all those assumptions, you're going so aggressive on that particular part. And then when you have those reverse auction and they are not converted into a PPA. Now, we have even seen in the last few months that the gestation period and the drop between many of those projects where you have auction, you have been successful bidders, many of us, but it is not converted from an auction to a LOI and LOI to a regulator approval and regulator approval to a PPA. And even if it is taking months and months. It changed the whole dynamics. You must have hedged your commodities. You must have hedged your foreign exchange. You have hedged a lot of cost when you are bidding so aggressively. There is no fat with which you are playing across on this. And even after signing the PPAs, if someone comes across and says, it's not looking that nice, the whole environment changes. I'm not saying that this country, that the system will not work. It will work. At the end of the day, everything will be right. But it is also important to create that environment which says that all is well. And all these aberrations are small things, but then there is a window with which the investors look at it very closely, and they consider a big risk out on each and every project. And that's what I think we should avoid collectively.
Harsh, do you want to weigh in on that before I come back for closing comments?
Yeah, no, I think I couldn't agree more with Ashish on that. And I think, yes, regulatory certainty is one of the biggest things any investor would look at. And the risk premia that India pays on the cost of capital because of this item is so huge and for decades that makes good any cheaper cost or tariff that any government thought that they made out of by reneging. Because the next time for next decade you want to do something, you're going to be charged, at least 300-400 points more of risk premium, which is not worth it. And one, it is not the right thing to do after the country has signed the contract. Second is to the downside of reneging is not that you are working or looking at national security. You are just trying to save peanuts, right? And then losing substantial amount of credibility in the global marketplace. So I think that's something which we need to work on as a country. We are a complex country. We are a complex judiciary as well as executive body, and it's a concurrent subject. So there are pathways, but if that can be executed faster, we'll see more and more, capital and reliability coming in.
Right. Okay. So last few comments. Let me start off with you, Ashish. So, the way nature of power generation distribution has changed in recent decades. Renewable energy has obviously injected a completely new way of doing things. I mean, you talked about rooftop solar. If I have a large residential or even a factory complex, I could install my own rooftop solar, reduce my costs, and not be dependent on the grid at all. Maybe unlike other utilities where I am connected to the grid and to the state and so on. So things have changed. I live in a building complex in Mumbai and I buy power from you, that is Tata Power. And therefore my relationship is with you and divorced from, let's say, BEST, which was the earlier supplier to all of Central and South Bombay. So that again is a shift. So tell us about, as you look ahead and in this new equation, how are things likely to change further? And what are the opportunities, again, just to focus and round up the opportunities as you look ahead? Ashish, it's over to you.
I think from a very monopolistic industry and very regulated industry, I think we are opening up now. And that's good for the consumer. The second part, which you alluded to and we have been talking about, is that whether it's a small consumer or a large consumers, they have also become prosumers. And it is very critical that then that consumer or a client is served well. Otherwise, they will have an option of becoming prosumers too. Where they are producing, they are consuming. You don't have a business opportunities out there other than installing it for them on the longevity. So I think the important factor which is going to come across is the quality of the services which we are providing. That's very important from all standpoint. Second is what is in it for the consumer and the society at large. At the end of the day, for a longevity and the sustainability of any businesses, you have to look at a larger picture. Consumer has to be taken care of completely, and the community at large and the society at large has to be also taken care of, and the things should go back. I think it's a great opportunity. If you see, you are in Mumbai and I'm in Mumbai, we have seen such a high level of exodus of the migratory laborers, which has gone back. Most of them are in villages and are in those small cities and are coming to Mumbai only for employment. If we can generate employment at those places, the chances are they will have a much better living out there. They don't need to come all the way here and migrate it back out there. I think that's also going to be possible with these changes, where we are giving them the right to do things. Only point is we have to be very mature. We should look at this industry not as an 100-meter dash where we should sprint across, but as a marathon where we have to keep on sustainably keep on running and doing good for the business, but as well as for the communities, and create more and more entrepreneurs. And one thing which we are not investing much is R&D. I think it is very important that we invest in the R&D, because in renewable, unlike the conventional sources of energy, technology has to keep on improving, and you have to be ahead of the curve. Today, China is doing that and reaping all the benefits. If we have to make sure that we are very inclusive in the manner we produce, whether it is the commodities or the energy, we need to invest a lot on our research and development, and especially for the requirements which are important for this country. I think if we invest on that, it's a great place to be.
Harsh, the last word is to you.
Oh, thank you. And I think I agree to all the points Ashish mentioned, and we buttress the point, the last that he mentioned on R&D. It's not about the number of jobs we create. I think what's going to be important, the 3,000 scientists to create a 50% efficiency module, then the 3 million people, right? That's going to be the tech-driven country and economy, right? We can't only be looking at 3 million. We'll need to also invest in R&D to ensure that those 3,000 engineers who can create a double efficiency material, because that's where the growth is going to come. And if you look at it, there are many, many research thought papers that are already out there. How do you, and right now we are at, let's say, 18, 20%, going to 50%, phenomenally changes the economics. For generation, for country, it can change fortunes of a country. So that it has that kind of potential. So that's something which we need to invest more, not just necessarily on manufacturing it by putting CVDs. Right? That's our old ways of doing business. While one can do that as a competitive thing, but to invest in technology, I don't think we do enough right now as a country. That's something one needs to really introspect on how can we do it more.
Right. On that note, this has been an interesting discussion. The future for alternate energy is bright. As always, there is enough capital. We do need some regulatory response and regulatory caution so as to ensure that investors feel comfortable and safe, and obviously are encouraged that they will get a good return on their investments. One key area, I guess, is to focus on technology, not just for future, but also for existing assets that we've created. And one way to bring that technology in is by obviously investing and nurturing an entrepreneur ecosystem that works well to drive change, as it has in many other industries in India. So that's the good news. Also, there are a lot of challenges on the horizon. Many of them are external. We've talked about climate change. We've talked about how, once again, shifting geopolitical equations, which will obviously affect flow of oil, for example, or as we've seen right now, it's not geopolitical, but high coal prices in outside are affecting coal cost of power and availability of power in India right now. So these are things to think about, but the opportunity, as always, is bright and large. On that note, thank you very much for joining me, and thank you And my extended thanks to Legasis for inviting me to be part of this. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye, Harsh.
Thank you. Bye.
We would now like to thank our panelists for their time. You may join our panelists now for a live Q&A session in the breakout room.